welcome to another edition of the Sunflower Nation Women in Leadership podcast. We are so excited that you are here today. Welcome to season 4. It's hard to believe that we are in season 4. And what makes today extra special is that many of you may or may not be aware of that May is National Mental Health Awareness Day. Najira Pearson Mutis, who is a licensed social worker and an amazing counselor and therapist, to be with us to share a little bit about mental health, but really about her journey, like we always talk about. So, welcome, Najira, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Edith. I am so blessed and honored to be here. As I was thinking about preparing for this podcast, I said, it's just such a privilege to have a friend, someone that I'm in community with, but also someone that has been a part of the journey and me doing the work. To be able to talk with you today in this capacity is really a wonderful thing. So thank you for the
Thank
invitation.
you. You are always welcome back. We haven't even started yet, and I'm inviting you back. So, Najira, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Najira, and I am a licensed clinical social worker offering services in New Jersey and in New York. I am a mom of two beautiful growing boys who keep me very, very busy, and a wife to an amazing husband. But I think one of the things that I would say about myself and my role is that I'm really passionate about empowering people. And so, as I do this work in mental health, it's more about empowering and supporting people in navigating their journey and recognizing that they have the innate ability to recognize what is going to help and support them and to help them overcome, and that I'm just someone who facilitates that growth and development. And so I really look at this as not just a job, but something that, I have been blessed to be able to do, right? To be a part of people's journey, that intimate, vulnerable space that they share with me is nothing that I take for granted. And so, as a clinician, working with individuals, I started off working with children for many, many years and now have transitioned in supporting adults and couples. It has been a wonderful transition, but also opportunity to really recognize the importance of relationship, which is something that I think we all can recognize as everyone is
Absolutely.
in relationship.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
It's funny when I teach communication courses, I try to drive home. I'm like, it's not about just the college journey. You have to know how to
Mhm.
communicate to have successful relationships. And the students kind of start out the semester like, oh, just give me my A.
Yeah.
But by the end of the semester, one of their end of semester projects is a reflection paper on your experience of communication, anything. And that's when you see the depth that really comes out of like that aha moment. Like I did realize now when I'm having an issue with my partner, I can approach it a little bit differently and the results are so different. So
Yeah.
I admire the work that you do, particularly as a woman of color. So often in our community, people don't seek mental health. And now there's more of a trend. I don't want to say a
Mhm.
trend, but there is more of a focus on mental health and finding that right person that you can connect with and that can support you. And I have friends who are kind of like, oh, I've tried this person, but I couldn't connect with them, so I stopped going. So it's great to see someone who looks like us doing this really important work. And sometimes I'm like, I need a therapist myself. But the two therapists I know, one is my sister and one is my girlfriend. I'm like, that wouldn't work.
but I'm sure, right? Referrals may be provided upon
Yes,
request.
absolutely, absolutely.
But to your point, it's very important, I think, for people to recognize in the same way that we may go and get a second opinion from a doctor, right? Because the first doctor just didn't look at us holistically or understand our history, or you want a different perspective. I think it's important to recognize that finding the right fit with a therapist is also okay, right? And so if one therapist doesn't work out, I tell people all the time, this is a relationship where you're coming and you have to feel comfortable. So if culture is important to you, if race and ethnicity are important to you, if gender is important to you, if lived experience is important to you, working with couples, people will ask me, are you married? That's important for them to recognize or understand my positionality, and my lived experience through relationships. And so I think everyone needs to be empowered to advocate for the aspects that are important for them as they are coming together and taking this therapeutic journey. Because you want someone that's going to be able to understand your experiences, or at the minimum empathize and have insight.
Definitely, I agree. Could not agree more. Did you always know this was the type of work that you wanted to do?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I chuckle because I fought against it for so long, Edith. It was not something that I wanted for myself. And so, I believe that people come with different gifts and abilities. And I remember in junior high school, I went to school in New York City and Queens, and I have to acknowledge some of the dynamic programming within the New York City public school system. And I was fortunate enough to participate in a program called Love in Action, where I spent half of my day serving at a nursing home and the other half of my day in school. And I knew very early on that I had an ability to connect with people. I also was a peer mediator. So whenever my friends or people I knew had an altercation of sorts, I was the person that facilitated the discussion with the oversight of the principal. And so as I look back, I recognize that, yeah, this was kind of always a part of who I am and have been. But for so long, going into college and declaring a major, I didn't want to be a therapist per se. I saw
What was
myself.
your major?
Yes, so I was a psychology major,
Okay.
but my plan was to become an administrator. And so I pursued my first master's degree in human services administration because I was going to run my own nonprofit and I was going to serve in that capacity from an administrative macro lens. I didn't see myself in the clinical realm doing the client interface, but it's ironic because the entire time that I'm pursuing the degrees, I'm working in other organizations offering counseling services to children, to parents. And so, how could I not embrace the fact that this was something I was supposed to do? It took me a long time to really accept it and to put myself, wholeheartedly into the experience.
So how did you, well, first of all, where did you go to school? How did you select your school? You're from New York City, right?
Yes, I
Where,
am.
did you go to public school in New York
I
also?
did. I did. I went to public school for the majority of my experience, and then I attended Christ the King Regional High School, which is a Catholic high school, for some time.
Okay.
Yes. And after graduating high school, I went to Morgan State University, which is a historically Black college and university. Yes, yes, which really changed my life. I think I came into myself. I was able to identify with other people who had shared experiences and perspectives. Although we're not a monolith, there is a feeling of connection and shared experiences. And living in Baltimore, which is so close to DC, which is Chocolate City, it was dynamic because growing up in New York, although it is a very diverse town or city, there's a lot of segregation in terms of where we live and
Yeah.
who we commune with. And my experience was that I was able to tap into other cultures and ethnicities in school and some of the volunteering that I did. But my community, right, was made up of people that looked like me. And so going to Baltimore and just being immersed in the experiences of Black people and connecting and learning about our culture and history on a deeper level really shaped me in ways that are immeasurable. And I'm beyond grateful for that opportunity.
It's funny. I did not go to an HBCU, but everyone that I know who has gone to one makes me feel just a little bit jealous that I did not have that experience. Now, I will say I will not take anything away from the College of New Rochelle, because it was a women's college, and um, a whole lot of who I am is
Mm.
because of that experience. So I definitely think selecting the right college for you as an individual is so important. So I totally get the need to be, you know, with your people, and at a HBCU. Did you know you wanted to go to Morgan State, or were there other colleges that you looked at?
That was a journey. So I didn't always know I wanted to attend Morgan State. And I think this is why college tours are so important. And I have to shout out Dr. Shango Blake, who was responsible for my first college tour with Brother Carlos. We were able to tour all of the historically Black colleges, and a majority of them on the East Coast, in my sophomore or the very beginning of my junior year. And at that time, I was able to cultivate a list of schools based on my experience there, based on their programming, and really just getting a feel, right, for the environment that you would be a part of if you were to matriculate within those schools. And so there were a couple on my list, I must say, and I was blessed to be able to go to Morgan, and there were some things that were provided for me. But I think, to your point, it is really important and advantageous for people to recognize what school is going to work for them and in terms of who they are holistically, right? I knew that I didn't want to be in a auditorium with 400 other people. I
Mhm.
wanted to be in a classroom with no more than 25 students so that the teacher knew me, right? And then I was able to get the experience that was going to help facilitate my growth as compared to just being a number, right? I really wanted an intimate feel within my college experience, but then also to participate in social activities, right? That's a part of it, of who I am as well. So looking at that holistically, and had a great time while I was there, I can say.
I bet you did.
Good
So
times.
college was wonderful. Then you decided to go to graduate school. Did you go to Morgan State also?
I didn't. So I went, interestingly enough, I attended a dual program between Coppin State University, which is also a historically Black college and university, and the University of Baltimore. And I was able to pursue a advanced degree in human services administration, which really prepared me for leadership, to take on a role as an executive director, and to really lead and support within the role of human services. And I wound up staying in Maryland for 10 years, and really
Wow.
making it my home, purchasing a home, being a part of the community, serving in multiple ways. I actually didn't think I would leave. But you have plans, and God has other things in mind for you. So
New York City, do you all hear that your girl Najira dropped you?
it did.
And that's
Yeah.
totally okay. I think that's part of, the adulting journey is you go away to college, if you're there and you feel like that can be your new home and you can lay down roots there, I think that's great. You create this whole new trajectory really for your life.
Yeah.
So 10 years is a long time. What brought you back?
10 years is a long time. I was forced to come back in multiple ways. I actually was working for this dynamic program for the state of Maryland supporting youth in the juvenile justice system. And if you can recall, 2008 or so, there was a huge financial crisis in the state. And so a lot of programs lost funding, and my program lost funding. And we were cut from 12 different branches down to four. And four of the branches that I was responsible for managing were no longer being funded. And I was faced with a decision: do you stay in Maryland and try to figure things out, or do you come home? And I came home for Christmas, and I attended a reunion of sorts with my high school friends. And I had a friend who was in human resources and said, "Hey, if you know anyone, I'm looking to fill this position." And it basically was tailored to my experience. And I'm out of a job and I can relocate, and I went for it. And
Look at
so,
God.
yeah,
Look
okay,
at
all
God.
in the mix, all in the mix. And I came home, sold my house, and came home and was able to, reinvent myself in New York, because the person that I was when I left was totally different than the person I was when I returned at 28 years old.
Were you married yet?
I was not. And
Okay.
so,
So that does make the relocation a little bit easier. Sometimes you feel like you have to stay because one of you, is thriving in a position. So everything happens in its time.
it does. It does. And when you're open to the experience, right, then you're able to really be present and to focus on the opportunities. And I could have been, a little bitter. I lost my job, a job that I was passionate about, a job that I was thriving in. I, had to restructure, right? And sometimes that's difficult. What's going to happen next? How am I going to do this? How's it going to impact my relationships? What's going to be available to me in New York as I'm trying to navigate the landscape of work in a way that I hadn't as an adult. But I was able to be open to it. And for some time, that meant moving back into my parents' home, and trying to figure things out. But yeah, thankfully, I didn't have any major attachments at the time. So I was able to be present and to make the shift. And it worked out because, to your point, I would say I returned full time in January of 2010, and I met my husband in September.
Nice,
Yeah. Yeah.
nice.
It
So
was a
you
nice
move back
happy
in with your
ending.
parents, which can be a huge transition. I remember going away to college. I went with the focus of I'm never going to live in this house again.
Mhm.
But that,
We
that
must
was,
have said they had the same motto.
yes, and they did. And
Mhm,
so like that was my like driving factor. Like
mhm.
you better do well in school. You better make sure you get good internships and you can't go back home.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I had a job in November that asked me to start full time before I even completed my degree in December. So it was like, I think it's a mindset. Like you have to know. For me, it was like a hard stop. Like, nope,
Yeah.
go back there. You got to figure it out. And I
Mhm.
tell my son that all the time. And now that he's getting older and closer to that point, I'm like, no, you can always come back to mommy. Come back to mommy. Come save your money here. And then you can just buy a house. Don't go away. But how was that transition? Because I know even when I would go home for break,
Mhm.
you have your independence at school, you move kind of freely, and then you go back
Mhm.
home and your parents have rules that they expect you to
Yeah.
follow, as they
Mhm.
should, right? It's their house. So how was that for you?
Yeah, I think it wasn't so much the rules that were challenging, but I gathered a sense that they may have been worried about my journey. And I think that made me a little uncomfortable. And I'm going to speak specifically to my grandma, who I love dearly. She's turning 90 this year, and I'm so excited
Oh,
to
God bless
celebrate
you.
her. My mom, not so much, but I think my grandma, she's a West Indian woman, and she has some concerns specifically. And I think this is important as it relates to women and gender and roles, right, that are expected for women in some cultures and even in American culture when we think about gender roles and norms. And I remember her saying, "Why are you coming back here? Right? There are no available men here. You need to stay in DC and figure it out." And at this time, I'm like, Grandma, how could you even be focused on that when I'm trying to navigate career? But I think one of the things that was always a motivator for me is education. And this comes into play because prior to me relocating, I had applied to a graduate program at Columbia University. And when I came back home in January, shortly after, I received acceptance. And so, although I was in my family home, I felt hopeful that things were moving in the direction that was going to be beneficial for me. I saw that there was something else here, and that if I had stayed in Baltimore, I wouldn't have been able to pursue this degree, right? And so it really just altered any doubt or any perceived challenges because I was motivated. I was invigorated. I remember opening the acceptance letter and I had a really hard day. And I opened that letter and everything just went away because I
Mm.
knew that my life was about to change in drastic ways. And it
Did you
had.
apply to Columbia before or after your layoff?
Yes, I can't exactly recall the exact timeline of things, but I know I was very much still living in Baltimore, and so I may have still been employed when I applied, which is interesting, right? That I would have done that. But I just think that speaks to the idea that innately, we can know, right, what may be next for us on the horizon. And if we allow ourselves the opportunity to take the risk, to lean into it without accepting the what ifs or the no's, then we can see different things happening for ourselves. And I would have never thought that I'd be accepted into an Ivy League institution. That just wasn't something that I saw for myself. But I guess I allowed myself to take a chance, and it paid off.
Definitely. That in itself is inspiring. You know what I
Mhm,
mean? Like, girl who comes from Queens, went to public school for the majority of her life,
mhm.
ends up going to HBCU, and then here you are at Columbia.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's major. And I think so often, especially young people who come from the city and who are have gone through the public school system, oftentimes assume that an HBCU is out of their reach or
Mhm.
an Ivy is out of their reach. And I think it's inspiring for us to know that, look, here you are,
Yes.
coming from a similar place, and you've been able to do all of these really amazing things. And it speaks to putting in the work and just taking a chance on yourself,
Mhm, mhm.
taking a
No,
chance
you're
on yourself.
absolutely right, and there are going to be many messages along the way. I remember my, high school guidance counselor's administrator. It wasn't even the guidance counselor, and when I was applying, to Spelman, she looked at me and said, "You can't afford to go there. You cannot go to Aspen on the weekends," her words verbatim, and that's how important adults are in the lives of children because I am 42 years old and I can recall what she said to my 17-year-old self. And that was such a moment where I felt defeated. Did I still apply? Yes. Did I get accepted? Yes. But there was a part of me, thank you. There was a part of me who felt like if I were to go, I wouldn't be successful. I wouldn't be able to fit in. And so, yes, a lot of it is taking a chance on yourself. But if you can be a supportive adult in word and action to a young person, please, please recognize how important and how impactful that role is. It's a responsibility, it's a duty because you are helping to shape someone's esteem and confidence, and something very flippant that you can say can really be deflating. And so it's
Definitely.
very, very important because I am just one of, right? And so there are many more before me and after me, but I pray that there's many more after me who recognize that I can do it too. There's
Yes.
nothing that can get in my way when I put in the work and I take a chance on myself.
But talking about that counselor, so I teach, and I teach a class that has, I would say, 85% of the students in there are athletes, specifically football players.
Mm,
And every single one of them believes that they are going to the NFL. Every single one.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, okay.
And in some ways, you want to be like, well, what's plan B?
Mhm,
Because I don't know any students from our 95-year-old institution who
mm,
have gone to the NFL. We're a Division III team.
mhm,
So in some ways, you want to help students manage their expectations, but you also don't want to shatter their dream, right?
yes.
And so it is a very delicate balance of I want to support you. Listen, I'm going to come to the game and I'm going to be the loudest person. They're going to be like, "That's your mother?" And Dr. Banks is your mom? No, she's just my crazy professor who loves on us so much and supports us,
Mhm,
right? But in the same way, I don't want students to kind of feel like, well, I'm just in school so that I can play my sport
mhm.
and the education is secondary.
Right,
And I
absolutely.
find that that happens a lot with athletes.
Mm. I think that that's a really good point, right? How do I uplift and empower and create a realistic expectation so that people are prepared, right? And I think that you captured it. What's the plan B, right? Because we all need a contingency plan. How will you pivot if this doesn't happen? Right. And so, how could you use your education if you don't get drafted? How might you apply to, or what other schools may you be interested in applying to if you don't get into your first choice, right? And in love, I believe that you can say anything, but it's how you say it. And am I
Right,
saying it in love and in support of, or am I looking to condemn or to make you feel less than, or something happening for me that I'm not aware of and it's coming out in this particular way? And
right. I see that a
so
lot.
that's very, very important where we have to be mindful and present to say, well, what am I feeling right now before I respond to this person, right? What am I experiencing so that I can be aware and make informed decisions in the way that I want to navigate this conversation. And sometimes, we're not present, we're reactive because there's
Mhm.
something else at play. In love, I think you can share that and support and be realistic and help navigate the experience, but not shatter their esteem.
So it's funny as I'm listening to you, I'm like, oh, she must speak so nicely with her children. Uh, and I remember at one point, my son used to be like, "Mom, I'm not one of your students." Or, my partner would say, "Stop trying to psychoanalyze me all the time. Just
Mhm.
talk to me right." And I
Mhm.
think it just becomes part of who you are.
Yeah.
But I also think that some people have this thought that you almost have like these superpowers,
Mm.
and you're going to be the super mom because you're able to think through things
Yeah.
um, a little bit differently. But I would imagine that as a mom, like you're thinking as a mom in that moment, and yes, your training definitely helps you. But so, how is it for you in your house? Like when you have to interact with
Yeah, no.
boys?
I think the joke amongst therapists is that you cannot be active in your family in the same way that you are with your clients, right? Like you can't be a therapist to your family in any capacity. And so I think my children would absolutely say that, she yells at us and, sometimes she doesn't always listen to us. But I will say that I try to be very intentional in creating space to talk and to process. And so, very early on, as they were developing language, the focus was on feelings. And so much so that, we spend a lot of time talking about their experiences. And I think that's, they might say, well, she doesn't always listen to me because at some point, baby, yes, we've processed it, and now we have to move on to the actionable stage, right? But it was very important for me to give them language as it relates to their experience and to use words that they were going to be able to use to effectively communicate with people what was happening for them and how to advocate for themselves. And I'll talk to my oldest son, and it really, I smile because it warmed my heart. One day he said to me, "Mom, you're a therapist. I'm having a rough day and I need to talk to someone." And I mean, he just merged, right? The mom part of me and the therapist part of me. And I felt seen, in that moment. But I also felt like I was able to be present for him, and he knew that. And that was really important for me. So
Powerful.
I try to create those spaces, but I have a tween, and there's attitude and there's, avoidance of chores and things that we want him to do. And then I have a 7-year old who's watching and mimicking. And so, yeah, I mean, my household is, I would say, like anyone else's. And I apologize. I am human. Sometimes I am in my thoughts, especially doing this work. It can be very impactful in terms of your own ability to be present because you're thinking about situations with your clients. And if you don't take enough time for yourself, you're going from session to home life. And there has to be a separation. And sometimes I catch myself where I'm still in my head, right? And I have to try to decompress to be present. So yeah, there's all of that happening in the same way as somebody who works a stressful job and comes home and is trying to cook dinner and navigate all their experiences. I'm in the same position, but I can say that the training and the exposure has helped me cultivate a certain environment where there's a focus on, let's talk, let's process, let's explore how you feel, and figure out through solution focused lens what may be helpful moving forward.
Now you see why I want you to be my therapist. Who's gonna say it so eloquently like that?
Oh, thank you.
Who's gonna say it? So, so if someone did want to work with you, do you have your own practice? Are you part of a group? Tell us about that.
Yes, yes. So in 2021, late 2021, I launched Abound Peace Mental Health Services. And I am a sole practitioner with the goals of growing into a group practice. I have an in person office in Teaneck, and I offer virtual services as well. And you can check out the website www.aboundpeacementalhealthservices.org. And I am accepting clients. Oftentimes there's a wait list, but at the current time, we are accepting clients. And I specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, which is a really short acronym for a really long title of eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing, which is a trauma focused intervention to help us make different meaning of our experiences, as well as trauma focused CBT. And I specialize in working with couples and adults. At the current time, I'm not specifically working with children, but I do support adolescents in teenage years to adulthood in that transition, as I also support college students. And so, yeah, if anyone is interested in a consultation, we offer a 15-minute consultation just to gain insights as to what it is, that would be helpful in your therapeutic journey, and to offer an opportunity to ask questions about my practice, which is holistic. And I want to sit with that for a minute. Um, a lot of times, clients will come into session and they want to focus on the thing. And yes, the thing is important, but we're also going to talk about how well you're sleeping. How well are you fueling your body? What's your physical activity level like? When was the last time you went outside and spent some time lingering in the sun? And so I am a holistic practitioner, and I'm going to explore with you all of the domains of your life, those relationships, those social connections, before we just talk about the anxiety, or before we just focus on the interventions to support depression, right? Because we have to recognize that we are more than just one life domain, and we have to take care of ourselves holistically. That's really important in my practice. So sometimes clients, will say, well, I didn't anticipate we were going to do a meditation in today's session. And I'm like, no, we're going to calm the nervous system, right? We are going to decrease the flood of hormones and that cortisol and that adrenaline before we can even talk about what's going on. So, that's something that's really important in my practice.
I love it. Can I please be a client? No.
I wish you could.
So do you accept insurance?
I do.
That
I
is
accept
amazing
the
because a lot of
insurance.
the challenges that I know people have with
Yeah.
identifying a therapist, they'll find a therapist who will see them and they'll do that consultation. They'll, enjoy that interaction and then later on find out that they don't accept insurance. So that's amazing that you have gone through the channels to ensure that, people have access to you and your
Yeah,
services.
and access is key. Even when you have insurance, it can be overwhelming to navigate, right? The list of providers and who does what, and what's the difference between a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed marriage and family therapist, right? It's a lot for the average person to kind of navigate and finding the fit. So one of the barriers, which is insurance, I tried to remove for people, especially, people of color. I want people to be able to have access to reach out, right? To see my name on their insurance roll and to say, oh, okay, I want to kind of touch base with her and see, what her practice is comprised of, and how she approaches therapy. And I think there's a lot more education that can be provided around how to find a therapist in very practical ways. I get overwhelmed, right, when I'm looking at all of the available
Mm.
providers, even for a doctor's appointment. And so we have to really work on access and providing information about how to navigate and to identify who's right for you, right? Do I have to go to a licensed professional counselor? What are they offering as compared to a clinical social worker? Because we do have different disciplines, and that's
We may
information
have
that
to have a
people should
little
know.
workshop around this because I think
Yes.
this is really important. But I want to focus more on you specifically. But I do think that that's definitely a workshop opportunity for people because, again, this is something, in my opinion, just like coaching, I feel like everybody needs a coach. I
Yes,
also feel like everyone needs a therapist because
I agree.
we need to be able to unload
Yeah,
and, process the things that are happening to us, so they don't keep happening.
yeah,
Because part of it is, I think some of it's in a lot of it is in our control.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Things have happened, but you're able to identify if you would like them to continue happening, those patterns. So yeah, you nailed it. How can I recognize those things that keep coming up and find ways to dismantle them?
how did you decide to open your practice?
So, interestingly enough, in this situation, I didn't bet on myself, right? My husband was actually completing his MBA program, and he was tasked with creating a business and a business model. And at the time, I was working in a group practice for someone else. And I was just coming up with all of this information, tools, techniques, things that you needed to do to employ in order to have your own practice. And I would share those things with him. And the realization that, in my mind, it was so much harder or such a bigger undertaking than actually it seemed to be, right? Here are all the tools. And I would just talk with him casually, and he wound up focusing his business plan and model for his MBA program on creating a virtual telehealth practice. At the time, we were coming out of COVID, and he's in healthcare as well. And he said, Najira, I think there's something here. And I took his blueprints. He filed for the LLC, and I said, okay, we're going to do this. And the business was born. He named it Abound Peace, and we launched in 2021 because of his vision.
That's amazing. I love those stories, right? You know, like working together, um, to create something great.
Yeah, and
Like,
it was unexpected. I once again, I didn't see that for myself, right? You have those goals. I believe in doing vision boards, and I like to. I'm very goal oriented. Um, being in private practice for myself wasn't specifically the goal. I was working in private practice and I felt like that was it. But the idea that I could create my own business, was eye opening and really transformational. And so I thank him for his vision, right? And faith that I didn't have at the time and the opportunity.
so at what point did you still continue working your 9 to 5?
Yeah, so in 2018, I decided to leave a structured 9 to 5. I was in a role as a clinical director of a residential facility for young people who were no longer safe living at home, and they were moved into this facility. And I had a 7-month old. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm spending 12 hours a day with other people's children, and I'm not with my own child. And so that was a pivotal moment for me. And I decided to leave. And I said, we'll figure it out, right? I knew that there were some part time opportunities. And so from 2018 to 2021, I was kind of piecing together some part time opportunities. Even had a wonderful opportunity to work as a psychotherapist at Monroe College, which has also been transformational in my collaboration with the college. And so I was piecing things together so that I could be available for my children in school, for PTA meetings, to be a part of the community, because those are things that fuel me outside of work. And so I didn't have a traditional 9 to 5. And I was really just thinking about ways that I could piece together opportunities to work, to serve, to do this work, and to still be here for my family. And I think that's one of the gems when you are able to step outside of the traditional 9 to 5. I know that's not for everyone, and it's not forever for some people. But given the fact that my children were young and developing, it was important for me to be present, and I was able to figure that out. And so, really fortunate and blessed to have the opportunities to do so.
Definitely. I know when my son was younger, I wanted so badly to be able to spend more time with him and, attend more school functions, and it just was not an option. So I'm always happy when I hear other moms say, nope, I stepped away for a minute, like career will always be there, but they're only going to be this small, but for so long. So I envy it a little bit more than anything. I'm just happy that they have this time with their kids that is you can't put a cost on it. It's immeasurable.
Yeah. And I want to recognize that I envied it too. And I had regret because I didn't have the opportunity with my oldest one. It was have the baby, get back to work, put him with grandma, abuela, or in daycare and figure it out. And those were the messages that I was receiving. That's how I saw it done. And so I didn't see any other way at that period in my life, nor did I feel like I had the credentials that I needed in order to make different decisions for myself. Having a clinical social work credential gives you a little bit more freedom and flexibility in terms of the work that you can do as compared to operating without the license. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to go back to school, because I knew it was going to allow me a little bit more autonomy, and it was going to give me an opportunity to kind of carve out my journey as opposed to this traditional 9 to 5. And I, like you, Edith, with my oldest son, I was at work. I couldn't leave. He was at daycare upwards of 6 p.m. and I was not happy. And
Right.
so, I was sitting in that and recognized that I didn't want to do that again. And really took a risk. And it was challenging. I don't want to put out here for anyone that it was easy. It was not easy. If
That was gonna be my next
financially,
question, right? Like it sounds like you have this beautiful, perfect life. You have two
nope,
kids,
nope,
you have your husband, you have your own practice.
nope.
I'm like, hmm, Majira kind of perfect,
Mm-mm.
you
That
know?
is
So
the
tell me
last
about
word.
one of the challenges that you faced. Was there ever a time in your marriage where you're like, oh, I don't know if we're gonna make it? Was there something, about your kids that it's like, am I doing it wrong?
Yeah.
Tell us
Yeah,
about one of the
absolutely.
challenges that you've experienced.
I'm gonna tell you about two. So the first one that comes to mind thinking about children, my son in the second grade began demonstrating anxiety, and I mean significant anxiety, so much so that it was affecting his ability to regulate, right, his bodily functions. So every 5 minutes it's I have to go to the bathroom, I have to go to the bathroom, I have to go to the bathroom. And a lot of times we'll focus on the medical issue. So I'm taking him to the doctor. I'm like, what's going on? It must be, I'm like, okay, let's rule out medical. But it was somatic in the sense that he was so anxious about something that he perceived might happen at school that he was unable to really calm himself. And he constantly had to go to the bathroom. And I say that this is a challenge for me because as a therapist, there's often this perception that you have it all figured out and that your children will not be affected. And that is completely false. And so as I'm going through that, it really allowed me to recognize what some of my clients are experiencing as they are parenting their children and coming in to speak about different challenges and issues. And I had to take a moment to figure out how we were going to navigate this. And it required me to go outside of myself, right? To seek the support of another therapist, and his school was phenomenal, and the school social worker there is awesome, and she was really able to help support me, and we were able to identify what was happening for him and the why. And so that was a really humbling moment, because I think other people think as therapists you got it all figured out, and you know that you really don't, and then you have to verbalize it and say I need help too, right? So that was one thing that stood out. The other thing was about my marriage. And so my husband and I, we were married in 2012 and we were pregnant. I was 8 months pregnant when we got married. And that first year was really, really challenging. I had lost my friends per se, because I was transitioning into a space that was not familiar for them. And I found a group called Mocha Moms for support, which is a whole nother conversation. But I was alone, right? So socially, I felt isolated and alone. I had the mommy blues, right? And so I experienced some form of postpartum, to the point where I remember having a conversation with my husband, and he's like, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm just really sad," right? I just felt the weight of this new experience, this life stage coming upon me all at once. Things that I said I wanted, but had no idea what it would bring, right? And so he's working, I'm at home with the baby. I'm totally responsible for keeping this person alive and regulating my emotions. We had moved to the Bronx. I'm not from the Bronx. That was a completely different experience, right? And I'm dealing with all of these things. I'm working full time, trying to figure it out. And my husband also has had his own challenges. So we were navigating that. And the first year, it was like, are we going to make it? Is this going to happen? And I remember him saying, "Give it a year. Just give it a year, right? And let's see what happens." And I have to credit the salvation of my marriage. Um, the only way that it could have survived is to God, right? Like, and I'm very vocal about that, and he is as well. That we really attribute all of the quote unquote joy that we've experienced in being together, with the challenges, to God, right? Like that is what has kept us through. To the point where, Edith, I would leave my job on lunch break and just go and pray, because I felt so helpless about how I was
Mm.
feeling, and about how our marriage was going that first year, and introducing Joaquin to our family, and it was rough. So the idea of perfection, no. Are we constantly working and tweaking? Yes. Do we credit all of our success as a family to God? Yes. And I recognize that that may not be everybody's experience, but I say that it's important to find what is going to be supportive for you. If that's the extended village, which I recognize, every marriage needs a village. You need to surround yourself with other couples who support your marriage. They don't support you, they don't support him, they support the marriage, if that's what you want for your family. So thinking about people, exploring your spirituality, if religion is something that you ascribe to, and really finding ways to take care of yourself and your family is important, because there's so much in terms of distraction. There's so much as we bring new people into the relationship. Every time a new child comes in, that's a new person to the
Right, right.
relationship. We don't talk enough about that. That's a whole restructuring of the family. And I've been impacted. So, perfect? No, not the word at all. We're constantly tweaking.
I definitely appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
Because again, sometimes people show up and they look so well put together that it's almost like, oh man, I'm the only one who's struggling with this issue. And that's not the reality, you know.
No.
So I think it's so helpful to hear other people say, this is what I went through, but I came through it. that is so powerful. And that's what I really view this platform purpose is really to be able to showcase women who are doing amazing things, but all of that greatness that you see in front of you, there's a journey that gets us
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
right? So it's not always been, you know, hair done, nails done, makeup on, I'm ready. It's not, that's not what really happens. And even when you quote unquote have it all together, even then we don't have it all together.
No.
There are highs and lows, highs and lows. And I think that's just life in general, right? So
Yeah.
right now you might be on a high, but eventually something will happen, unfortunately, that's going to
Unfortunately.
bring you down, but it's about having that support system to help lift you up when you're in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
space.
And that's the next point, right? Like things can be one way today, but we know that by virtue of this human experience, we are all, right, exposed to trauma. I have had trauma in my life, right? Has it been exposed on this particular podcast today? No, but to your point, it's the journey that shapes us. And we don't know what's for the future, right? There is going to be, to your point, something that will come by virtue of our experience, our children's experience. It's just the nature of the world that we live in and a human experience. Um, However, right, how can I make sure that I have what I need? And that's one of the things that I really try to focus on with my clients. It's not about being free of the presenting problem, but how do I navigate the problem? What do I need in order to get through this experience? And we all are tasked in figuring that out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Najira, you are amazing, like I said in the very beginning, and I'm so grateful that you have spent this time with us. So I have one final question, and
Yes.
that is, what advice would you give to young
Hmm.
women coming up?
Yeah. I would say trust, right, yourself. And I'm not talking about listening to the negative voice that tells you you can't or focuses on the what if or the uncertainty, but at the core of you, what is it that you feel for yourself, that you know you want for yourself, that you know that you can have and achieve? And I think sometimes as developing girls and women, we ignore that sense of ourselves. We take on the voices, the narrative from other people, right? We listen to what society says and we allow that to define who we are. And although, those things may be present, how can I honor myself enough to listen to and explore, right? That part of myself that knows what she wants, that knows how I can begin to align to achieve those things. And it's really just about listening and honoring. Um, Giving your attention, right, to yourself before we give it to everyone else, which is something that as women, especially, in various cultures, we're socialized to do
Mm.
very early on. So that's something that I would share with women. And I would also say that you are able to make mistakes. Right. I know there's this whole thing with Black Girl Magic, and I think it's wonderful and it's inspiring. But I also want to say that we don't have to walk around with the pressures of wearing a cape and being a unicorn.
I don't
It's okay to
subscribe to
cry.
Black Girl Magic at all.
Okay. Okay. This is
Yes,
why we're
that
in
was one of the
community.
outcomes of my dissertation was I don't subscribe to it. I don't um, push that message because it puts this immense pressure on
Yes.
our young girls that they have to be perfect. They have to be able to do it all. And then they grow up and they have strong Black woman syndrome, right? I
Right.
have to do everything by myself. I don't need nobody. And that has not served our community well.
at
It
all.
really has not.
No. So this is once again why we're in community, right? You can cry, you can fall, you can experience things that, may not have served you, but you always have an opportunity to grow in spite of that, right? And to lean into whoever it is that you want to be. And there are women here to support you. Oh, that's so powerful. There are women here to support you. Lean on, lean into, share with another woman, and you will be surprised at the support that you're able to receive. Mentorship is invaluable, and I know sometimes it can be intimidating, but as women who've navigated certain things, we want to help and support. Ask, reach out, right? Make those connections. It will serve you in the best way, and release that idea that you're magical. No, you're human,
Exactly.
but you can
Thank
have
you
it.
so much. This was so good.
Thank you. Thank you. And when you say this was awesome and amazing, I am in the presence of someone who's been able to cultivate their dream and make it a reality. And that is amazing and inspiring. And I am fueled, right, by just being in community with you. So thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for all that
Thank
you've done
you so much.
in your journey.
Thank you so much to all of our listeners today. I know if you were listening, you definitely got so much out of this conversation today. And as always, may your hearts be filled with the brightest of sunflowers, even on the cloudiest of days. Wishing you love and positive vibes. Until next time.